Hello everyone. Today, we're bringing you a new live stream to show you how to interact with OMIE's energy data, which is the energy market operator in Spain, where electricity generators, solar panels, wind turbines, hydroelectric dams sell their energy at a price for the hours of the next day, and retailers buy that energy at a price and then sell it to you in your homes or to industry. We're going to create an AI agent that has an MCP server, which is an API, a mini computer, that can query that OMIE data because we have it pre-processed, and it'll give us a response based on what we asked. First of all, as you already know, we're doing a series of live streams every week, which we've titled Vibe Coding, Building Real Projects Live. And you have all the recordings available at this link, datans.com/streams. Here you can see all the episodes we've recorded. They're registered here. And if you want to stay on top of everything we do each week and the future live streams we're going to develop, well, you can click the bell here and leave us your email to send you when we publish the next live streams. Also, here you can subscribe to the specific live stream, and we'll give you access to exclusive materials we work on during the stream. On top of all these streamings, we're doing this within the company Datans, where we make data work for you, not the other way around. And we build all kinds of solutions related to programming applied to data, whether automations, API integrations, and so on. Here we have several examples of what we've developed for other clients. You can take a look. And if you think we can collaborate on a project, go ahead and click here to schedule a call with me. You'll see here everything we're going to do during the call, and from there we'll see if developing a project together makes sense. All right? Let's get back with the presentation. All right then. Something always happens to me. Give me a second here to fix the server thing. These presentations are really good. I make them here with a little program, with a markdown file. And once, here I put the server. All right. Okay. So all these recordings are available at datans.com/streams, and what we're going to work on today will be an agent that answers questions about electricity prices. For example, what was the average electricity price last week, and how does it compare to the previous one? The chat will query OMIE's historical data through the API we develop, and it'll tell us, well, the daily market price was 87.45, 12% higher than the previous week, and the peak was reached on Wednesday at 8 p.m., because we've given it the ability to apply those mathematical operations on the average electricity history, and the OMIE data peak that we'll organize in folders, as I'll show later. What context do we have, and why is it important? Well, we have the data from the Iberian electricity market operator, which is OMIE. It gives us the prices for tomorrow. It's public data, both for Spain and Portugal, and they give it to us in CSV or XML format, updated daily. If we go to this link, we'll see graphs about the data. We can see, for example, European intraday markets, although some data is private, aggregated supply and demand curves. So there's a lot of information, but of course, we want to make queries on the raw data initially, and that data is accessible here in File Access. To give you more context for those who don't know how the energy market works, we have here the clearing curve. That is, up here in blue, you see these are offers of, for example, at 5,000 megawatts. Well, there's a power of 4562 megawatts that are willing to buy. But if you notice, if they're willing to sell, it would be minus 20 euros per megawatt hour. So, What's the price determined for a specific hour in the market? Well, you're going to see here that there's a clearing price which is exactly where both the offers from those who want to buy energy and those who want to sell their energy meet, which are the solar plants, gas plants, photovoltaic, and that's the price that sticks. There's a lot of information we have here in detail in the OMIE data file access. We see according to each market, because when we work with OMIE, I don't know if it'll appear here. Let's see. OMIE data. Let's see the market report. So, the thing is, for tomorrow, we already know the electricity prices you see on the previous page, which we have here, date January 29th. Today is January 28th. And why do we already know the prices? Because at 2 p.m. today, those who buy and sell energy have already submitted their bids. However, at 5 p.m., we have a better weather forecast, and then I'll know with more certainty if the solar panels won't have clouds on them and can generate that energy. That's exactly where intraday markets come into play, which you also have the information for here. You have intraday session 1, 2, 3, up to 7 intraday markets. And here you see that session 2 isn't available yet because it'll be at a later time. I think at 6 p.m. or something like that. You can look up this information on the internet too. So, there's a lot of information, a lot of data we can work with. We have here an OMIE data file access, and here all the types of files we can query appear. We have, for example, the daily market prices in Spain, which appear here. Very good. Thanks. And it gives us for each of the days, the 29th, 28th, 27th. Well, I download it, and we see here the file format. Let's do it with Visual Studio. And here we have the data. If you notice, here it appears a bit unreadable at first glance because they're separated by commas, by semicolons. So here it tells us in the first column what the year is, what the month is, what the day is. Here it starts. Since the information is quarter hourly, well, they tell us each of the minute sequences. So this would be the first quarter hour, the second quarter hour, etc., which give us one price for Spain and another for Portugal. So, of course, all this raw information, well, it has to be processed so we can query it clearly with AI agents. We're going to do a process where we download all these files, save it in a database system, let's say, and the API can query all that information. Every time I visit a link, it crashes. So, now knowing the objective and part of the context about the OMIE files, how they work, let's see what the problem is and why accessing this data isn't so trivial. In the current workflow, what an analyst does today is download the files manually, just like we just did. And then we have to understand the format, CSV zones, zone codes, and so on, which is what we did before, and process in Excel or in Python. We have to filter the information, aggregate it. And finally, we have to repeat again. Well, if we have to go to last month, do the same with each of the months. All this can be automated in a much simpler way, so the chat can interact agilely with the data. Give me a second. Someone came to knock on the door, and I'll be right back. We're back. So what I was telling you, the process is very manual if we want to work with the files, as we said before. We'd even have to process them with Python. Therefore, we're going to automate it. And what we're going to do at the end of all this is ask the chat, hey, how much did electricity cost yesterday at 8? We're going to ask our user's question. That question will go to the AI system, and finally it'll give us the answer and tell us euros, megawatt, hour, or whatever we need. What hours were cheapest? It'll also tell us the information. Compare with the previous week, and there it'll tell us the answers by querying the functions we develop. How are we going to build this solution? The system components will be an API in FastAPI, which is one of the Python libraries we're going to work with. And there, we'll structure the query of OMIE prices. Then we'll have an MCP server to be able to connect to the AI securely, in case we need to give access by users or restrict access, etc. Finally, we're going to work with the Claude Code AI agent, and finally we'll do visualizations with Plotly through AI too. You'll see during the stream that I'm going to barely write any lines of code, because AI is going to do it all. What architecture are we going to follow? Well, if the user asks the question, hey, average price from yesterday, how do we get to that answer? The first thing is to have the AI agent that's going to intercept that question and send it to the MCP server. Inside that MCP server, we're going to have the tools which will be give me the price, give me the daily prices, statistics, give me the cheapest hours, or make me a graph of the prices. And finally, they'll give us the answer after the tools have queried the database we have in the OMIE API we're also going to build. What is MCP? Well, it's a standard for connecting to AI. We define functions that people can use, and we have control over what AI can do in a more deterministic way. If you want to check more information, we have it here, and you can see all kinds of applications that can be built on this MCP protocol, Model Context Protocol. And here all the documented information appears about the architecture, how it works, what a client is, how it goes to servers, how it connects, etc. Very interesting. So, what tools are we going to work with? With Python, FastAPI, FastMCP, which is the library to set up the MCP server, and Claude Code to develop the AI-powered programming. Write no lines of code. So, let's get started with it. The first thing I'm going to do here is in the terminal application. Here I work with Ghosty, the name of the terminal. We're going to create a folder that, if you notice here on my computer, well, it's here. You can also do it yourselves. And I'm going to name it Code. We'll go inside Code. And here we're going to open Visual Studio. We're going to open Visual Studio simply by dragging the folder here. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a folder I'm going to call Plan to Structure what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So the objective now is create a process, a script, to automatically download OMIE data files that contain energy prices. Second, we're going to create an API to access the data. Historical, according to, for example, start date, end date, and then we can even put mathematical operations. Aggregated, like give the average daily price. We're also going to distinguish market type, because as you saw before, we have the daily market. Intraday market, where the clearing prices are established at 2 p.m. today, at 5, at 7, etc. Now, once we have that API, we're going to set up the API on MCP server to make it available to the Claude Code agent. And here we'll have to keep improving the workflow dynamics. Well then, what do we start from in this project? What are the inputs? Let's go to the OMIE files we had before. OMIE data, file access. Let's go with the daily market, and here we have the prices. So I'm going to tell the chat. I'm also telling you. The chat could even navigate to all these links and ask about the information structure. Let's copy here. We're going to say, here. Okay. Yeah. Data files. And what worries me most is how we're going to create the project structure. So the tools we want to use is UV to create the Python project. Then UV is a technology that allows us to create this whole process as if it were a library. You can see all the information here and why it's much more advantageous than using Poetry, which you might know, or PIP, which is Python's package manager. For example, if I go to Python SEOs, which is a library I created to query the electrical grid data, you can see that it's here to install with PIP, which is Python's package manager. We're going to work with UV, which is built on top of PIP, and it's going to facilitate all the development, so the AI can query the information. Agilely? Then I want a repository structure that's SRC, where the code is. I want a structure next to it that's data, where we save the raw data. And nothing more for now. So, with the Claude Code AI, which you can install. Here, you install it, which will appear if you don't have it to install, and you have to log in and also register, which is a paid account to be able to develop the code. If you don't want to pay and want to try something, well, you can also do it through this chat we have here, and it comes integrated with OpenAI and also with GitHub Copilot. We can try to say here what it's going to do, and you'll see it also does the same. For example, I paste the information here and the chat now. We have to ask if we want to access the model. We click Enable. Here for example, I'm not registered. I'm registered with my GitHub account, but for free. And there, it does let you work with some AI. But if you apply a lot of requests, it'll limit you. But hey, to try it, you can also do it. By the way, if you have any questions, anything while we're working on all this, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to help. In the end, I want this to be a more interactive session than anything else. I don't know anymore. I'm going to send you guys a little message in the chat so we can introduce ourselves, where you're from. I'm in Salamanca, which has snowed today in Spain. Also in the channel, there are people from Latin America. So we get to know each other and break the ice. Let's see. What do we have here? Well, the chat has already created the folder structure we have here on the left. If you notice here at the beginning, it explored a bit that the code folder we had created before creates the directory structure. SRC creates the multiple files, the documentation, and the structured project. but of course, here I can also tell the chat itself to execute it. Let's see. We're going to say here that we keep the changes, and now I tell it execute. It asked me something here. Of course, here it's saying it wants to work with these to install the dependencies first, but I don't want to use UV-pip. Use UV-sync to install, and then download the OMIE data. And here I think it crashed. So it doesn't ask me all the time. I'm going to tell it here to allow all commands and let it start executing. Notice here that the chat itself has opened a tab on the terminal that's executing the code. That if I stay here at the top, at the beginning, notice that it's applying the UV-sync command I had asked for before. So here it already tells me the first data has been downloaded. And here in data, we can see the file we had obtained before. And here I can say, OK, but they need to be preprocessed so we can work with them correctly. I'm going to use a tool I have here. It's called Whisper. And it allows me to access the information in a faster way. Just give us a second. So, let's tell it now. No, it doesn't work for me. Now, I need to restructure the data folder because on one hand, we're going to download the raw files, which are the CSVs you've already downloaded. And then we're going to process them into .parquet files so the AI can be more agile when accessing the data. Notice what this tool does is transcribe what I've done and puts it there in the chat. I'm not even going to type with the keyboard anymore. Here it already starts structuring the information. You see it tells me raw data and processed. And now it says it's going to update the code to support this structure. So if I come here to the code, I can see what it's adding, what lines it removes and adds. And here's the thing for the Parquet files. Here there's something I don't like, that it's removing this one, but many times it publishes with a .2 at the end, because it puts 2 files per day. So here I already have to indicate something. How can I mention it in the chat? Add selection to chat. I'm going to tell it here that don't remove the 1 because I need it, since sometimes OMIE puts a .2 on the files. So you're going to have to modify how it gives you the Parquet output files. Here the chat itself asks me if I want the copilot to keep iterating, because it has to keep modifying several files. Now it should modify this file and remove it from one and update the process. Now here it's already removed that line and works only on. Notice that the chat itself, the AI itself, based on what I'm commenting on and what it updates, applies the changes and has also re-downloaded the files to test that the tool is working correctly. Here, I already have the processed file that we have in a Parquet. Okay? Well, now let's ask it that I want to work on several files. The thing is, I usually work on another code editor, which is NeoVim. So I'm going to switch to it and remove Visual Studio from here. And we're going to work with the terminal. It's the same, only from now on, the files appear here on the right. They're the same, and I'm going to work with the chat. Here, in this panel, the information is the same. I'm going to say, study. Review the plan. We had here. Voilà. It's reading the implementation files the other agent had created. We have here the implementation. To have more context, and so this chat can continue with the session. In the end, notice that I worked with an AI agent. Like I had done before in Visual Studio, that doesn't mean the project has to depend on this AI agent. From Visual Studio, I can go to another agent I have here, and it explores the repository at a glance. And from there, it continues with the programming. I did it mainly because here I have a series of tools I've created in this agent. And so I can query the documentation with parameters I specify, etc. If you want to know more about this kind of thing, let me know in the comments and we'll see if we make tutorials or sessions for it. Okay, so now we're going to do it directly, like starting from the end. I already have the processed data here, in this folder. Very good. Very good. From the raw data we had seen before and I already want, through this chat itself even, to access that information. So, I need us to develop the MCP server to access the Parquet files and we can query the information, whether from a past date to another date, start and end, or apply mathematical operations on the data and have everything available so Claude Code can connect. We're going to use the FastMCP library. It seems to me, here I'd even like to have the information beforehand, what it's going to do, and how it's going to do it. To develop. Of course, this is what it's doing. If you notice, it's going to see the FastMCP documentation in this tool I've given it. And here it's already seeing that it has access to the FastMCP library and is going to query the official documentation to know how it has to develop the code. Here we have it. See? How to create an MCP server that can be called by Claude Code. Here. It's already starting with the information. And here it already tells me, well, the server we're going to create will expose these tools, which will be, well, give me the energy prices. Aggregate the energy prices, or even download the OMIE prices. And this is the implementation plan it proposes to me. First, add the library. Create the tools with parameters. Install it on the Claude Code server. And we could already interact. So we're going to say here, before continuing, it's asking this question of, do you want to keep the FastAPI API? Of course, I tell it here. I'd like you to restructure the FastAPI API so it can be mounted on the MCP server. And so, if we create a web application in the future on the OMIE data, we can have both the API that serves the web application and the MCP server for AI agents. This is the main reason we apply an API-first structure. First, we develop the API, and then it stays as a base, and then we mount it to an MCP server. Okay, this is the structure they proposed to me, and it tells me here, have the FastAPI, then the FastMCP server mounted. And with the OMIE service, we have all the logic. Perfect. Although maybe it needs to consult, I don't know if it's done it. Here, it used one of the tools I have, which is called Mount FastAPI inside the FastMCP server, to combine and have everything as a base on the API server. And it gives it the information that if we notice here, and we go to the file. Here we already have the documentation. The AI agents themselves, if you give them the tools, could get to see, if they don't know in their training data the relationships and this text. Normally, it hallucinates and makes it up and writes code that then doesn't work. But if it has the tools, it can query this documentation online, then develop code based on the updated docs, ensuring what it writes actually works. It's going to write in the code works correctly, even if we then have bugs for debugging. It can also query the documentation information in real time and develop it. This tool is called Context 7. Here, if you notice, we search for FastMCP. And here we have the way to document. If I, for example, tell it FastAPI integration, well, here it automatically searches for me, where in this documentation the relevant information comes to be able to develop it. What I've done right now, manually, of coming to the Context 7 web application is what the chat does automatically, because it has those tools. And it has the tool here. It says General Docs. The thing is, you won't see it, because those are tools you create for yourself. If you want to do it yourselves, well, you have to first see here inside how to install it. Here it'll tell you, well, you can install it these ways, in Claude Code. You have to register it, which is free, with an API key, and then it can access. And if you want to create a tool so it accesses this information deterministically and doesn't make things up, that follows a procedure you define, you can create a Claude Code skill, a skill, as it's called, which in the end, this is a folder you create yourself inside Cloud Skills in the repository itself. And you could already access that tool in a specific way. In the Markdown document, you tell it here what that skill is going to do, and it'll do it for you. Well, let's go back here. We see the information is accessing correctly. Spain and Portugal prices. Here it's getting an error. Here it is. Well, yes, it's trying to write an implementation. That's fine. Already here, notice it's created the API, and I can access through HTTP, which in the end is a web server, to this entry point. And with the start date and end date parameters, I tell it to calculate the average, and it already gives me the average price between a pair of market dates. Okay, it tells us now implementation completed. We already have the system ready, both the MCP server and the API. And now we have to integrate it to the MCP, add to the project configuration. And we're going to say it here. You can install with FastMCP, because it has the instructions, so that server we've created, if I go to the file, it's MCP server. Notice this file. What it does defines here the variable from the FastMCP class that comes from the library, and here you already indicate what this server is going to do. And down here, you start defining each of the tools. Notice we have the tool to get energy prices, the tool to have aggregated prices, the one to see available dates, download OMIE data, and process the raw files. But remember, we now have two files, which is the MCP server and the API. Really, the API is already defining how to get the prices. So we're duplicating here on one hand the API code with the MCP code. How can we simplify it? Well, I had told it to mount it, and I think it has it in the combined application code. Let's say here it tells you it's executing from main.py, that main.py has it here, and exactly here. It puts the commands for. All the execution here already defines if what I want is to do the MCP server, but of course it's accessing here. I have to say, but right now, in the code, you haven't integrated FastAPI inside FastMCP. Instead, you've recreated everything you had in the API in FastMCP too. You're duplicating the code, and if later we have to modify the API, we also have to modify the FastMCP file. Let's give it here the instruction to solve this problem. Now that it's already realized, and now what it's doing is, instead of what it had before, which was creating each of the tools one by one, it's removed it and told it that the FastMCP server integrate from the FastAPI we created before. So it simply imports what we already had, which is here in the code. And it'll work just as well. Do you have any errors? Because the server is already in use on that port. But it should work now. So now, of course, this simplifies the code a lot. We don't have to. Every time we create a tool in the API, maybe get intraday market prices. It won't have to recreate all the code in this MCP server, because what it's doing is, from what we already have in FastAPI, we mount it to FastMCP. And from here, it can already execute all the processes because it integrates very well. This is what's called following the practices of modularity and DRI. DRI is don't repeat yourself. That is, if you apply a process in the code, and every time you modify it, you have to develop it again in another place. Well, you have to maintain two things at once and in a very manual way. With this principle, we don't have to do it anymore. Everything we create in the API file will be replicated in the MCP server file, so we can interact via AI agent and also have the API, in case we want to offer this data to a web application. And now it asks us that, of course, how can I here tell it, for example, hey, what prices? We're there in the daily and have it respond. But of course, here there's a trick because in this repository, it already knows the server. So what it has to do is install it in another folder. So what we're going to do now is in the same folder. Here it has knowledge. We're going to go one folder back and create one that's demo code. So here for now, in code demo, we don't have anything. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to put it inside code demo. And here we're going to tell it to create it. So I'm going to ask here, okay, how do I install the MCP server? In another FastMCP. Now here the chat itself, notice how smart it is. It says, I'm going to see what the documentation of the library tool itself is like. That I already know, and here it starts. There are many commands and finds the command to install MCP servers for various clients. In this case, the client can be Claude Code in a folder, the one on the left, without knowledge of the code we developed. It could run independently, and here you see, we have the documentation of how to install it in Claude Code, and here it gives us the instructions for it. And what has it done? Well, install it, but it's installed it on the general server. Yeah. How do I install it in the same folder? If you notice with things about AI tools, right now what it's done is create this file that you see here, MCP JSONs, with the instructions themselves of how to access the tool that we created here in this main.py server that we have here, and that main.py server is saying that if the next argument is MCP, well, to import the server and execute it from the file we had before MCP server. Here in this other file. So, of course, all this automates the process for us. We have here the instructions to connect to the server, and this same file is what I should have in this other folder. And that's what I'm going to ask now. That is, if I want to install in another folder. And here it gives me the instruction. So here, since it's in this folder on my computer, in my code, well, I have to say, create MCP JSON. I'm going to do the litmus test, okay? Notice we've called the server OMIE Energy. If I now open the chat in the other folder, and I ask it about the MCPs I have here, it's telling me, okay, because it's installed locally. I mean, I have here installed in my user SOTA cloud this server, so there it's doing the trick. I have to first tell it to remove the MCP server from the user SOTA cloud JSON, because if not here, it's doing the magic trick. I'm going to restart the chat. I don't know if I think it hasn't updated automatically. We're going to remove it, put it again. It's loaded the file. Let's see. It's loaded the file because it made a change here and already messed it up. Fix the file you... The bad thing here is I can't reset it automatically because it made the change through Python code. Now there's no problem, but it's still the OMIE energy thing. I'm going to say, see if you can remove the server with CloudMCP. CLI. CLI is the command line interface that can also add MCP servers and remove them. And there it says there's a command to remove. So check all the ones that are here. And here I messed up. Be careful with the servers if you put things here. You see here it's published a key. Well, if you have this key, you could usurp my typefully password and publish on the internet on my social accounts. That's why you have to be very careful with these tools, because sometimes, if you don't properly encapsulate the environment variables, which are the ones that give you access to other accounts, they can steal your identity or publish in your name. Even if you had trading servers to buy in the stock market, additionally, it could also do it automatically. So be very careful when working with these tools. Okay, here in theory I've already removed it. So if I now come here and remove it, it shouldn't appear. Perfect. It's not here anymore. The OMIE thing. And now, when I paste what we had before, which is this code here, the one I put that way, we're going to ask it for the command to install it in the other folder. And it tells us we can copy this file, which is what I did before. Let's see. I'm going to copy here. Let's see, it's pasting it for me. Let's see. It's already done it right for me. The thing is, here it continues with some errors. Okay, do this. Let's do it. Look, from Claude Code, if you put the exclamation mark symbol here and then paste a command, which is what I'm doing here now, it'll execute it. The thing is, but of course there's a problem here. Well, wait. Notice what it's doing here, which is global for all projects. Well, I only want it in this project. I only want it for the project, not global. Because if not, I won't be able to see here the file it's going to create. Consult the documentation. Which would be to add at the end of that command line project. And there it gives us the option. So here, perfect, we say. Install with this command. Hey, a question. What's more comfortable for you guys for me to program on this? NeoVim, or do it through Visual Studio, which was what I had before? This application the same from the user's point of view when doing the live streams, or is it more comfortable? And maybe we can do it from there all the time. Just let me know. In comments if you watch the stream later. Whatever. Okay, let's see. Here in theory it's installed, but I want to see it here in the project. I already have it. But there's a problem, and it's putting it without the C dude. Very good. Let's see if it can connect. Here it tells me it failed. So what I'm going to do better is execute the server. And so I connect. By URL. But thanks. In the file, you need to go to the source folder before executing. Because right now, it's doing it as if the folder is executing a main.py file that's here in this project. But there isn't one. Where that file is here in the other project. Okay, here it's already specified it. Perfect. And now it should work. We restart. And here it tells me it's failing. Here it works when it executes it. That is to consult, because sometimes the file structure isn't correct, and maybe there are failures there, so it's consulting there in the Claude Code library. How to do the query. Here we go. Anthropic, which is the company that created Claude Code. And here it says, CWD isn't a field that's standardized. So what it's going to do here is first change, and then to the repository, and then use UV-run to execute it. Let's see now. And it appears connected. So let's tell it now to test. Perfect. Well, test now to query information. And notice that no. Well, here it already knows, because we've already given it context of where the repository is and all that. So we're going to create a new chat. And I'm going to tell it here, in that new chat, query the OMIE prices for tomorrow. And let's see if it figures out it has the server available. And here notice it says I need before making the calls to see the instructions on how to get the prices, which is what we've defined on the server. Notice here in the function we have in the API, which we told it get price from API. I think it's this one, get prices. And it tells it, gets energy prices for a date range, start date, end date, and market type. And here is the same information the MCP server has, but now without seeing the code, because it's in the installed tool. That means if you guys in another project that has no reference to the code, you can also query that information, or your colleagues if you're working on the same server. And here it tells us, there's only data for January 27th, and it gives us the prices for Spain and for Portugal. And here it already tells us, and that's how it connects. But of course, we've already solved the main problem, which was how to connect the tool to an MCP server in an API and have it return the OMIE information. I'm going to see now some clearer demonstration, like for example, can you calculate aggregated mathematics with the MCP server I gave you? And there it's already querying the information. And here it gives it to you. What's the aggregated price for the whole day? In this case, the standard deviation. And here it gives you all the statistics. Aggregated. All this is automated. The thing is, there's a problem here, and it's, let's see. In the end, all this is used by those of us who know how to program, because we know how to get into this file, how to modify it, etc. But someone from programming, your work colleagues, who wanted to get into the chat, but without having the code, how would they do it? Well, there we have to use deployment on a web server and put it in the ChatGPT or Claude Code application. So let's open it. Let's see. Give me a second. Hey, I don't know. Let's see. I think I can do it. So you don't see the chat conversations. Let's see. I'm going to connect to Claude. I'm too lazy to do it manually. Notice here, we're in Cloud.ai, which is an application like ChatGPT, which you can access, and we could, anyone without needing to know how to work with code, and we can tell it here, I want to add a connector. And what's a connector? It's a URL that gives me access to a service, like for example the ones we have here from Asana, Figma, Slack, also from Box here to access files. We also have other web, etc. If I tell it here to manage connectors and I want to add a connector, well, I'd have to tell it the name and the remote server and give it here some credentials. So the remote server in the end is a URL we have here. We can put HTTPS and here put, well, a URL, just like that. And from here, we can already query the information. So we're going to tell it here, OMIE data. And for me to put a URL, like this live, we're going to do it quick with a server, with a service called ngrok. If I remember correctly, give me a second here. Let's ask. We're going to say now. I need to deploy the MCP server on a quick URL to do a demonstration. What kind of services offer this? I think ngrok is one, but give me several options and I'll choose. In fact, if you guys do the same, it'll also work for you. We're going to do the test two ways, with ChatGPT and also with Claude.ai. Here it tells me I can do it with ngrok, with a Cloudflare Tunnel, even from GitHub, but well, I'm going to use ngrok, which is the one I know works, although it's recommending I use Cloudflare. Well, I wouldn't even need an account. And say that okay, let's do it and see how it goes. Man, this is crazy. I've never done such a clear demo with Cloudflare. Let's see. All right. Let's see if here. All right. Okay, so we've got it now. And now, what do we do with this server? We give it the MCP here. We click Add. And in theory, it's already connected, and it tells me we now have 4 tools available. So, if you use the same URL that I'm using in ChatGPT or on Claude.ai, you'll be able to work with it. I'll leave it there in the chat if you want to do the same. Of course, what it's doing is connecting to my server. Let's see if... I don't know anymore. So with that link I shared in the chat, if you go to Claude.ai and you have an account, you click on the connectors. Here you click Add Connector. Name it OMIE data, for example. You paste the URL I shared, and you should now have access to the servers. So, if I now tell it to create a new chat and I want to see what tools I have available, here I have OMIE data. So I can say, hey, what prices are available in OMIE data? And it's going to give them to me. It's asking me for permission. I'll say always allow. It tells me that only the date January 27th is available. I say yes, and now I'd have access. We should do something more interesting. Let's see if we can make graphs. Here it's showing me all the prices. Man, this is crazy. Really crazy. Look, it's here in Cloud.ai, and in no time it's accessing the server we have here. Absolutely insane. What I don't know is if it's working properly. All right. Right now, it can only access prices from one date. How to download all dates. From 2026. It's crazy how fast all this AI stuff is advancing. Okay, here it's already downloaded all the dates on my computer. I'm going to say here. I've updated it with all of January. Calculate the daily average. And here in theory, it should calculate the average of all the daily values. What happens is, I want it for each day. So it would need to group by each day. I don't know if this is available. Does the server have the ability to do aggregated calculations grouping? For example, by day, and should I do it? Here it's adding it right away. Group by operation. And we'll tell it to do it by day. By date or by hour. What I don't know is if it reloads automatically. Of course, it doesn't reload automatically yet, you see here. So it needs to restart the server to load the changes. What happens is, I'm going to ask here, is there any way to do hot reloading? So that every time there's a change, it replicates and can update it. The bad thing here is, it gave me a new URL. Okay? Right. And here, I need to configure it to give me the new URL. Let's go to Connectors. Manage them. Configure. We're going to uninstall it. And here, I can't edit the connector here because it already has the associated URL information. Add MCP. Since we added the functionality, we could try now. And here, it already applies the group ZA, so we click Always Allow. And it should give us the result. For January 1st, January 2nd. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So, what are we going to do now? Look, there was something the OpenAI folks released recently, which are MCP Apps. And I don't know. Let me see. It tells me here. Let's see if they have a video somewhere. It says it here. And look at what it does, because it's going to say, give me a color picker to make it interactive. Click Allow. And here, it already shows you how to interact with the application itself, with the data right inside the chat, without having to create any web application or anything. So, how can we replicate this to make it generate the graph directly here? Here it says you have to create like an app application and configure the project, but they released that very recently. I don't know if we'll need to do the same thing. or if the protocol is available in Python. Let's see. Let's go to FastMCP. Let's see if they've created apps, but I don't think so here. Right. This is a problem because if we now have the MCP built on GoFastMCP and they don't have applications, well then, friend, we can't replicate it, but we can do something. Let's see. I'd like to create MCP applications which they released recently. Review this documentation and see if it's feasible with GoFastMCP and what you propose to develop it, whether or not it works. I need to give it the link. You can also stop the chat cold. And here, you just tell it on a new line the URL we had here. What I don't know is if there's a directory somewhere of MCP Apps to try. All right, here they have a blog. Excalidraw that creates a sketch in an application that's Excalidraw for creating these types of flow diagrams, even here with another one that's Amplitude to see. Who visits you on the web and so on. You can modify the types of graphs. Incredible. Here with the task manager, which I don't know. I've already researched what FastMCP are. I mean MCP Apps. It tells me here how to declare the tools. And the MCP doesn't support it. So here it recommends a hybrid system. Since what we've done so far is relatively easy, we're going to tell it to recreate it. We're going to tell it here that, yes, create the hybrid system. But I don't know if it's going to do everything in the same folder. It's creating MCPAP here, a separate folder inside this project. What I don't know here is, let's see. Well, let's leave it. In theory here, we should separate the repository so that on one side, we only have what's in Python in a separate project and only what's in MCP app in another project. Let's see if we try it later and tell it. First, let's make it work. My computer is going to explode. 83. But, well, the machine's holding up. All right, let's see now how long it takes to create the system. Looks like it's already developed it. It's working. Of course, the code it created here is MCP App, which is a TypeScript project. Since we're working with a web application now, with web components, well, it needs to work with that programming language. Here it shows us the server using the same MCP library that's recommended by the people in charge of developing this technology. And here, they already put the tool registration and everything. So now I want to try adding it to the connector. And it tells me it's already deployed. Well, let's try it. Let's see this URL here. We go to Claude. Connect another tool. We're going to call it OMIE. Dashboards. It's connected. And now we're going to tell it what I want. What I don't know is what kind of questions I can ask it. Hey, show it in the dashboard. If it does this, wow, super crazy. Crazy. I mean, it's like you don't even need the OMIE page anymore. You just skip it. And it's like you have supercharged access to the OMIE data page, but without having to navigate through graphs or anything. Or having to go into file access files. Nothing like that. And it directly makes the graphs for you. I mean, the same graphs you see on the OMIE website. That you have here, like the average price for tomorrow in Spain. The chat itself could generate it in the moment. You know what? There's an error somewhere. Let's fix it quickly. Let's consult the official documentation because it proposed a couple of options that are pretty hacky, I think. And let's see what it tells us. Do you guys work with this technology? Well, I have one there in the chat. Anyway, you'll see it later. But wow. Sometimes you wonder, right? Because you do the live stream and only one person stays, right? Is it worth continuing to do live streams? I don't know, whatever. If people knew how much you can earn working this way, because in the end, it's very easy to talk about money and hook people, promoting what you're selling. What makes money? Well, anyway, the MCP server is already connected. Try using the connector in Claude now. Change the schema. It should work now. It's still the same. Let's tell it to try again. It works, but of course it tells me here you have the dashboard data, but I want it to show me. I want you to use the dashboard to generate graphs with the actual. It's asking me again. Now it does work, but it's not letting me interact with an interactive application inside Claude. Let's see what it tells me. Well, what I can do for future live streams, or even do one tomorrow morning about how to connect to these tools. And that way you don't need any code. Let's try. All right, I see. It's now consulting examples of projects that do work to show the interactive graphs in Claude itself. And then it should definitely do it. The bad thing is, it's going to have to restart the server. Okay, we'll restart the server because it looks like it's made the improvement. Let's see if it works properly now. I'm going to reload the chat page. I think now the MCP is exposing. Now I want to use the Show Energy dashboard. Wow, absolute madness. It generated it. I click Update, but it doesn't work. I'm going to tell the chat. How crazy. Of course, it returns the code here. The data, there's an error there, but anyway. We'll just fix it quickly. Let's take a screenshot. How crazy is this? Insane. I mean, you don't even need to create web applications anymore. Everything is just going to go inside the chat itself. I mean, one application for everything. Crazy! They're definitely going to ask for this in companies. For some companies I work with, up until now, what they've asked me is, hey, create a web application for me, and then I'll put the chat inside the web application. But for me, in the end, it's like reinventing the wheel, because the chat is already offered to you by ChatGPT or Cloud.ai through their own interface. So wouldn't it be better to create secure authentication systems so you can access your company's data, and they put the dashboards here for you to interact with that information? In the end, too, if you have a business account, you can reach an agreement and all that. But anyway, also the chat systems. The same way you connect to Google Cloud or Google Docs or Google Sheets to pass information. Well, Cloud.ai also has its security measures in place. What happens is that with OpenAI, which has been pretty aggressive there about grabbing data, many times without consent, well, there's a lot of distrust. But anyway, the idea, instead of creating web applications, You invest in creating tools so that inside the chat itself, your employees can access through username and password inside the application to these systems. Well, of course, that's where the business opportunities are. For example, notice that if I want to connect to any of these accounts, I need to connect first and validate my Gmail user so I can connect through Claude to my email. And there I have to put my password. Well, the systems in companies will be the same, only each one will have their own. But you won't need to recreate a web page to have the interaction with the data. In the end, you're reinventing the wheel. What you can do is create mini applications that inside Claude itself, you can show your professionals how to interact with company data. Man, this is crazy. It's going to be really crazy because in the end, what companies are going to ask for. There are many opportunities to jump on the bandwagon. Done. It's over. How crazy. How crazy. Interacting with OMIE data in real time through the chat itself with a customized application that now, you can automate all of this to your environment. Absolutely insane. Well, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. You've seen here that if we go back to the presentation, localhost 330, we wanted to talk with OMIE data. Hey, what was the average price yesterday? Give me the answer. We've already achieved it. And here we've used this whole agent structure that's connected to an MCP server, which is in turn connecting to OMIE data with these tools to give me the answer. Not only have we reused what already existed with MCP, but yesterday, or the day before yesterday, they released the technology for applications inside Claude. Well, we've created an application inside the chat itself to visualize OMIE information interactively, as if we had deployed a web page and be able to interact with all this OMIE information. I could even tell it here, hey, give me from the 15th onwards. Update. Insane, folks. So anyway, I hope you liked it. You can review the whole tutorial on the YouTube page itself and on datons.com. Remember here, we have the live streams we're doing each day. And it'll be uploaded to the one we have today, which was in Spanish, Talk with OMIE Data. And here you can hit play, and you'll be able to connect, which, well, right now it shows the same live stream we're working on here. If you want more information about upcoming live streams and receive emails to sign up, I'll also send an email about how we've structured all of this. Part of the code, and you'll have access to it. Same way we did with last week's, which we did in English. Here you have other resources from maybe short videos on how to work with demonstrations of what we're developing and see if it's worth it. Well, to watch the whole tutorial. Here we have everything, the result, the problem, both in English and Spanish. Here I'll have to fix something, and if you have any questions, any inquiries, let's see if we can collaborate on something. Any suggestions? Send me an email. I'll be happy to help you. And if you want me to develop solutions for your company of all kinds related to programming and data, you can schedule a call with me where we'll evaluate what you need, what technical feasibility it has, because many times we get ideas about what's possible and what's most practical for your business. We can look at that too, because in the end, you're the one running your business. You know in what way. You know what you need, and maybe from my technical point of view, with everything I know about applications, and especially the cutting edge of what we've seen today with MCP applications. With artificial intelligence, which came out 2 days ago, and we've already implemented a solution. Well, we can give you a range of possibilities from which you can choose and make a more precise decision to scale your business processes and grow as a company. Then, if it makes sense, well, I'll send you an action plan. Advice. And here you have everything we're going to do, other clients we've already worked with, and what it will be like overall. So if you schedule a call, you can see my availability here. And that's it. Very easy. I'll send you an email with a link, and there we'll see each other. So anyway, folks, thank you so much for joining me on today's live stream. I hope you had as much fun as I did, and you can watch the recording and everything related through the web application, datons.com, and we'll see you next week on the next live stream.